Okay, and welcome back. We are in late August 1852, and the war rumbles on as we enter late summer. And we have only known good weather in this war, haven't we? It only occurred to me as I sort of considered the date and how long we had left of good weather that this war has only known good weather. It began in late March, it began in the spring, and it is about to enter the autumn in about 6 weeks' time. The warm, flat plains of the eastern part of the Balkan Peninsula are going to become flooded, are going to turn into quagmire, and warfare is going to assume a very different character. In terms of our move then, the principal maneuver that we conducted was Omar Pasha's army moved from Rumelia through Varna into Constanta, with the view really of closing this bottleneck off to the main Russian army besieging Plevna. Amazingly, that Russian army has still failed to take Plevna, and not without trying. The Russians launched an additional attack against Plevna. This time they have made considerable more headway. They inflicted 10,000 casualties. We are starting to see serious numbers of troops in Plevna now surrendering, but they still managed to inflict 16,000 casualties on the Russians. I should point out very quickly, this occurred to me in an earlier video, that I sort of seem to imply that horses, this represented cavalry. It doesn't. The men in cavalry divisions do come under men. Horses are just horses. So just in case anyone were watching and looking to learn something about the game, that it might inform their own playing, I didn't want to sort of sow any allusions into any of the reports. It is a defeat, so this suggests that the game is kind of up now. I mean, we have a very thin force left. 2,300 men and 32 cannons. I feel sort of rather bad because I've been saying for more than a month now that the game is up in Plevna, but it really is now. But that's okay. Look, the sacrifice of the garrison of Plevna has been utterly heroic and has really served a concrete purpose. It has provided us with time to concentrate our force, organize our force, and maneuver it into position. And we have done just that. Now, we should be a little bit cautious here. It's very easy to look at this and to kind of conjure images of mid-20th century warfare, a la Heinz Guderian encircling swathes of Soviet troops in the 1940s. The basic principle here is sort of the same. We've placed our army in between the Russian army, its base of supplies. We engaged the reserve in Constanta, and as fortuitous as it is, this is a very brief engagement. It looks like the reserve broke off very quickly. One round of combat. They suffered slightly more casualties than we, but their casualties were relatively light, and that force fell back into Plevna to join the main Russian army, which is very interesting indeed. It now looks like there is nothing to the north of us, and we have bottled this Russian army up. But as I say, this is not quite the envelopment and encirclement campaigns of the kind of mid-20th century. The principle is the same. The Russians will not have access to a continuous flow of supplies from their depot at Odessa. But we have to bear in mind, as I sort of repeat almost as a mantra, this is not an era of continuous front lines. It is possible for Russian forces to pass through here. Regions are, even with large military forces based in them, are somewhat more porous than they would be in 20th century warfare, for example. If Omar Pasha were not activated and forced to the defensive, and small Russian forces were set to evade combat, they could feasibly pass through here. However, it is not inconceivable that we could destroy this entire Russian force. It is not beyond the realms of possibility, and is looking like a real possibility, actually. Now, this Russian force, I think, really is on the verge of taking Plevna, and Plevna has a depot, and there are some supplies in that depot, and those supplies would be sufficient to support a garrison for maybe a month or 2 months more, maybe 3 months even. But a large army of 50 to 100,000 men with a reserve that's just folded into it, I would suggest that these supplies will find their way from the depot to the latrines of Plevna via that army in an eye-wateringly short period of time. I think that within 6 weeks, these supplies will be depleted entirely, and the Russian force is in a very perilous situation here. A very perilous situation indeed. I think it was Sun Tzu that said something to the tune of, true greatness is to defeat an enemy without engaging in any kind of real fighting at all. Now, I don't think we're going to quite reach the high water mark of that sort of that criteria, but we should allow that to inform our actions, I think, in the coming weeks. It's very tempting to set Omar Pasha's force to an offensive posture and to move into Plevna. It would take him 7 days, engage the Russian force, and would likely inflict a fairly substantial defeat on that Russian force. Where that Russian force falls back to is anyone's guess. It might smash into its various component parts and fall back in different directions, fan out across the Balkans. It's really hard to know what would happen. That Russian force is substantially weakened. It has limited supplies. It's probably somewhat disorganized. It is, in some respects, a colossal force, even though it's been whittled down. If this Russian force had been attacked in Plevna from the south, fell back through Constanta, was allowed to move into Bessarabia, and then allowed to build its force back up in Odessa, replenish its regiments, and bring up reserves, I think this could be a force of 150 to 200,000. It's been whittled down, I think, to about 50 to 60,000. So in some respects, a large part of the job is already done, and it's been done by the garrison of Plevna, which is not even a meaningful field command, it's just a fortress garrison. But I think caution once again may prevail. There is no point in attacking. The longer that Omar Pasha stays here, we will stay on an offensive posture because we intend to destroy anything that attempts to pass through. The longer that Omar Pasha stays here, the stronger he becomes. His organisation will improve. This move from Rumelia through Varna into Dobruja in this brief contact did create some disorganisation. We can see that. Cohesion has dropped a little bit. This was, I think, a 10-day march plus an action at the end of it. And this is a pretty large, cumbersome force that he now leads. But the longer he stays here, the stronger his force becomes. The cohesion improves. I don't think there's much in the way of replacements that are required now. The Imperial Guard still requires some replacements. Obviously, we took some casualties in that action, very small numbers. But we grow stronger. The longer we sit, they grow weaker. The longer they sit there. I'm thinking that it's likely that moving into early September, this Russian force may even miss the opportunity to finish the job at Plevna. They may sort of launch an all-out attack at our position in Constanta. This is my thinking. This is an emergency for them. I think that that's a likelihood. They may finish the job. They may finish the siege. They may storm what remains of the fortress of Plevna, receive some supplies, and then based on that, launch an attack. But I think we need to sit tight. This bottleneck is, I think, going to seal the deal for the Russian army in the Balkan Peninsula. Now, it would be tempting, and I've been considering this a little bit today, to think of Russia as, it is a colossus. It's a huge land power. It has the largest standing army in the world, and it's likely that it has some fairly substantial forces located to the north. Maybe they're marching south already. Maybe they are just out of view. Maybe they might be in Kiev. But Russia is not the Soviet Union of the 1940s. It's not an industrial colossus with big production lines. Russia maintains a very large standing army, but when huge losses are inflicted, if Russia loses an army of 100 to 200,000 men, it would take a long time for Russia to build that force up. Of course, it has the manpower, but Russia requires more than just men for soldiers. Soldiers require furnishing. They require textiles. They require manufactured goods in the form of webbing, belts, boots, hats. They require firearms. They require ammunition. And this is Russia's Achilles heel. Despite the fact that it's a colossus, Russia has an industrial economy that's probably smaller than Belgium's. And it would take it a long time. The basis for Russia's military strength is protracted periods of peace that allows it to accumulate the resources required to furnish a large army, to utilize that large reserve of manpower. And if this force is largely destroyed, it's not just reservists that Russia will need. It won't just be replacements. It will have to reconstruct units from scratch, and that is a more expensive thing to do. Your reserves are really stockpiling textiles, it's stockpiling uniforms, it's using state revenue to kind of prepare the basis for replacements, and it's much easier to replace losses in regiments that have sustained losses than creating entire units from scratch. That is much more expensive, much more time consuming. And that is Russia's Achilles heel in the 19th century. Imperial Russia is not the Soviet Union, is not an industrial colossus yet. And it's likely always going to be, in some ways, this is likely always going to function as a kind of bottleneck, if you like, for Russia's strength, is its limited industrial base, its limited capacity to convert its natural advantages into concrete power. It requires, a decade of peace to construct a large standing army. And it's just that bottleneck that's going to provide us with the elbow room, we hope, to finish the job and seal the deal on the Balkan Peninsula. And if this comes off, it is an absolutely huge victory. It's a catastrophe for Russia, despite its enormous strength. This is a catastrophe for Russia that is on par with the catastrophe that France would have experienced in the 1870 war with Prussia. It is a wholesale defeat, and it would result in a substantial national morale boost for us, and Russian national morale sinking significantly. We can already see that Russian national morale is now down to 96, so they're beginning to feel the effects. So this would be really interesting, and what we need to start doing now, I think, is to consider what moves we make on the basis of this army being destroyed, because if it's destroyed, it will be destroyed by the end of the year, and we're about to enter into September. The longer we leave it, the harder it's going to be for Russia to attack, and all we really need to do is sit tight. I think once we're in a position where this army really begins to wither and really begins to kind of enter into crisis, by this time our army will have been, it would have been secure in the same location for a period of time. Its cohesion will be in good shape. And I think once that is the case, we'll be looking at detaching Khurshid Pasha to screen north into Bessarabia. Now, it's not going to be on the cards that the Ottoman Empire is going to conduct some kind of, full invasion of Russia. It would be pointless. I mean, even if we could put it off, which we couldn't, it would be. There's so much territory here. It would be very, especially with the winter coming up, it's not going to happen. And even if it was spring next year, I don't think it would. We wouldn't get anything out of it. In the last analysis, Britain and France are going to be calling the shots on the peace deal. It would be pointless wasting our efforts penetrating deep into sort of southern Russia, where we're going to be kind of stamping on a nest of fire ants, really. It's going to be very, very difficult to conduct a kind of serious invasion of Russia. But we should have some limited operations in mind. Odessa, I think, Podolia, for example. Both of these regions contain depots and fortresses, and we would look to take both of these territories, destroy the fortresses and destroy the depots. And we would conduct raids, spoiling raids, using small forces, brigades, into southern Russia, limiting ourselves really to the southern Ukraine, the Crimea, and in the east, situation permitting, we're hoping that the Russians will begin to peel some forces off to bolster their situation in the west. We would also look to destroy the fortress at Erevan and at Tiflis in Georgia. And again, we would conduct spoiling raids as far east as Baku and as far north as Grozny. And we would burn, destroy anything that we come across. Any agricultural enterprise will be destroyed. We would simply destroy anything that we came across, any fortress, any port, anything. We will kill, pillage, and destroy everything. This will have an effect. It will have a prestige hit. This isn't something that is widely regarded internationally, but we would look to deprive the Russians of any kind of staging point for further invasions of the Ottoman Empire. Of course, the Russians will eventually recover these things that have been destroyed. They will rebuild fortresses and depots, but it will cost them money. It will take years to do that, and it will provide us with some security at the end of this war, when Britain is no longer there, when Britain may be preoccupied in India or with some conflict elsewhere, and Russia once again eyes us hungrily. So this is something that we need to consider. Perhaps next year. It's not guaranteed. We don't know that we don't know it's going to come off in the West yet. We don't know how good this could be. It may be the case that the Russian force manages to create a corridor, gets through Constanta and moves north into Bessarabia. If that's the case, the status quo is preserved. We will retake Plevna, and we will still have defeated the Russian invasion of the Balkan Peninsula in the west. But food for thought. We certainly need to start considering, as I say, destroying RGOs, destroying productive sites, and raiding and this kind of thing. It doesn't do well for our prestige, but our prestige is probably already far ahead of what the Ottoman Empire's prestige was anyway, based on our success in the Crimean War so far, which has been more substantial than the Ottomans experienced in real life, based on our economic growth, which I would say has been more substantial than was the case in real life. And we can see that we have surpassed Austria in terms of prestige, and we're still some way behind Prussia. Prussia sits at number 5. It's the 5th ranked power. We sit at 6. That is something that we need to keep in mind a little bit as well. This is sort of butterfly effect stuff. The more aggressive we are, the more successful we are in a war against Russia, the more aggressive our position is on a global market. this will pique the interest of Vienna and will have ramifications for us in time. I think probably it's unlikely that Vienna is going to move on us whilst we're in any kind of alliance with Britain or France. But when this show is over with Russia, Vienna, the Austrians won't like a kind of the idea of a recovered or restored Ottoman Empire. So we could be looking at a showdown with them at some point. Hopefully not for some years, ideally not at all. But it's something that we do need to consider. We do need to start making plans for. So that's the situation in the West, and that's the plan in the West, is to sit tight for now and see what the Russians do. They're going to take Plevna. We simply want to hold the bottleneck at Constanta, and that really provides us with a basis for destroying their forces. No point gambling anything just now. We will stay on an offensive posture. We will be attacking all out if anything moves in Constanta, so we'll be keeping an aggressive posture here. We do have supplies, and Constanta has a port, and we have a maritime fleet operating in the Black Sea, so in the event that the Russians try and make what they think is some kind of clever curveball, move into Varna or Amelia, we can still keep this army supplied. Furthermore, that just means that a rather fractured, weak Russian force has just sort of divided itself. We could easily detach one corps and move through, as we have done, as Omar Pasha did himself, move through Varna, Romelia, and open up the way to Adrianople. That's the situation in the West. In the East, well, I should point out that our old friend Riza Pasha has been moved to Sinop, and he is en route to take command of the situation in the East. He is a 3-star general. We don't have a 3-star general in the East. We do have fairly capable lieutenant generals, but in order to get the command points and the concentration required to begin to seriously consider offensive action, and I say offensive action with some apprehension given that it is Riza Pasha, but at the very least we can start looking at getting some serious force concentration together in Kars, and begin to looking at dealing with Vorontsov's force. Now, I should say as well, I had mentioned that we were looking to build an additional army corps. That army corps is in construction. It's a militia, if you like. It's kind of a conscript corps. These forces will gradually be trained and turned into regular troops. But that force is in construction. It's kind of being furnished. Training is underway. We're really just waiting now for deliveries of guns and also the HQ, the core HQ unit. So we're looking to kind of form staff for that force. When it is finished, it will accompany Riza Pasha to his command post in Kars, where he'll be joining up with Abdi Pasha, and then also Hussein Avni Pasha. We'll begin to form a proper structured command here. We already have the kind of toolbox ready to do that. We have supply wagons. We have some supply wagons that have just arrived all the way from Aden in Erzurum, and it's a funny business, the East. I mean, the Russians have been playing a game of kind of smoke and mirrors, really, and they missed an opportunity. They could have taken Kars. Kars was under siege. There was really not much we could have done about that situation, frankly. But they pulled back. We don't quite know why. They still maintain a large force in the region. It's now visible. And intelligence suggests that we have another force to the north in Poti, under the command of we don't know who, but it is a commander. So it's a proper structured command. It comprises 2 regular units of some character. So they are regular forces. That could be anything from a corps to a brigade. We just don't know. And a supply detachment. That is something we need to bear in mind. If that is a force, if that is the spear tip, if you like, of a larger force that's becoming assembled, that might mean that the Russians are looking maybe to kind of upset the balance. If they're having trouble in the West, maybe they're going to start really piling pressure on in the East to try and maybe get us to peel forces off or something like that. We'll wait for Riza Pasha's his force to finish kind of training and to finish fabrication, and then we'll begin to move that force towards Kars. We know that it's a long march. We know from experience this is tough terrain. You're not going to move forces through, or we don't seem to be able to move forces through these regions very quickly. The Russians seem to be rather adept at it. But then these are kind of conscripts. They're not going to be troops that march terribly quickly. And we could once that force is assembled in Kars, we can then begin to maybe look at some offensive options. We can maybe look at to kind of mix things up a little bit, because at the moment all we've been doing is kind of hopping from foot to foot, and really just trying to sort of do what we can. I mean, Abdi Pasha is set to retreat if engaged, really defend for one round and then pull back. I think we're probably going to do the same. We've got the same set for Hussein Avni, so we're not in a position to kind of to force any kind of committed defence in the east at the moment. And if we do, we don't want to start losing sort of 20,000 troops at a time in one battle, where there's no real prospect of holding a province. The good thing is we have Kars and Erzurum as both fortified locations. This calcifies the frontier, and this means we've got a little bit of defence in depth. So, it's going to take the Russians some time to take Kars. When they do that, we've got Erzurum to fall back on. That's it. I think in terms of military matters, that's considered a defeat at Plevna, even though we still hold it. We win at Constanta. The Russian reserves folds back into Plevna, which is great. It's much better than they move north into Bessarabia. That means, as far as we know, there is nothing to the north at all for the time being. So outstanding. And Batumi, we managed to brush. Hussein Avni managed to brush that cavalry division aside, destroying its horse artillery regiment. That appears to be the force in Kutaisi that's just moved north. So things have stabilised in the east also. Let's have a wee gander at Aden, see what's happened. Okay, so we can see that the Yemenis have moved south towards Taiz. There's a good possibility then they might be sort of looking for a flank option, maybe going for Hodeida, take the harbour there, the anchorage. How many days travel? At the moment it'll be 21 days. I think we'll sit tight for the time being in Sanaa. We won't sort of hop around like a wet hen, as Wellington would say. We don't want to kind of keep moving around and eroding our organisation and cohesion or anything like that. We have brought the raiding fleet back. Its organisation and cohesion was so low that I think it was time to bring this force back. Unfortunately, nothing was spotted. Didn't do anything at all. It's really a summer of sailing around fairly pointlessly in the Mediterranean, not spotting any Russian ships. We know that Russians are operating there, so Russian ships are passing through. It's just that our raiding force has achieved absolutely diddly squat for the time being. Disappointing, but it goes like that. Who knows? We'll get these guys on leave, shore leave, restock the ships, get them organised, and in the autumn we'll look to go back out. We've also brought the Imperial fleet back into Constantinople, much for the same reasons. This force needs to restock with supplies, munitions, get the crew on shore leave, and then maybe in the autumn begin to conduct further sorties, either in the Black Sea or maybe a standing patrol in the Eastern Mediterranean, Aegean, something like this. In terms of military business, that's it for the time being. We'll flick through to see if there's anything that's worth reporting on other than that. One problem that I'm noticing is with these kind of Greek islands, we are seeing a bit of supply strain. We're struggling to get supplies, just of small kind of outlying forces, but it's no huge problem. We're bringing them back and getting those guys supplied on the mainland. In terms of the economy then, pretty decent round. We're still looking to hoard manufactured goods and steel and military supplies in any way that we can. That does depress the amount of capital accumulation that we can get. We still do gain capital, and we're investing in enterprises. These tend to be kind of low yield, cheap enterprises that don't require large amounts of manufactured goods. So an example of that is a cattle farm that we've just begun developing in Taurus. And I think before that, the only other structure that we began building was a textile factory in Constantinople. I think the next industrial structure that we're going to look at is going to be an exploitation and collection centre. Now, I mentioned way back in, I think, 1850 or 51, that there is a part of the Ottoman economy, I suppose what you'd call the kind of sort of Kurdish region of northern Iraq, eastern Turkey, which has a highly regionalised economy. This is not a part of the national economy. Now, if you had a city or town which has a population factor of 3, that would essentially function as a kind of collection and exploitation centre. That would plug a region and, or if you like, a territory and the surrounding territories into your national economy. In the absence of that, which suggests that you don't have a highly concentrated population in any particular area, what you have is really dispersed population in very small villages. You actually need to physically build collection and exploitation and collection centres. We'll probably build one in one of these territories, maybe Mosul or somewhere like this. And the idea would be to plug this region into our national economy. This should hopefully, this will allow us to exploit this region economically in years to come. There's no major rush, but hopefully will maybe also serve to kind of give us a bit of boost in terms of domestic consumption and this sort of thing. Pretty solid round of exports. Consistently selling to tobacco, coal, nitrates, cotton, preserved foods, dyes, fruits. We're starting to see now some really consistent figures in terms of exports to Britain, and that's something to be expected, of course. Now that we have a merchant agreement, a commercial agreement with them. Domestic market sales then, 64 units of goods selling at 255. That's pretty decent. That's fairly solid. We've been looking at sort of averaging between 240 and 260 throughout much of this year. I think my plan to get to 300 by the end of this year is not looking likely now. So economic growth has slowed ever so slightly. Exports remaining solid, always around sort of 50 to 60 units of merchandise, and always at around kind of 120 to 140. Slightly poor balance of trade this fortnight, but again, we're okay with that for this. We are at war. We're looking to accumulate manufactured goods. Also, we want to build up a stockpile of steel, so that when technology permits, when theoretical developments permit, we can begin to look at some really expensive enterprises, things like locomotives, railroads, and that kind of thing. I don't think the Ottoman Empire is too far away from the technological capacity, the theoretical capacity to sort of develop those kinds of things. That's it. In terms of reports, that's it. So it's all about bottlenecks, really. Constanta, let's hold. We're going to pinch the Russian army off into Plevna. We'll see what the Russians do. Ball's in their court. We still hold the initiative. The longer we sit here, the stronger we become, and the weaker they become. The ball's in their court, and we sort of hold all the cards, really. And once this force is destroyed, and if you look at the number of units that this force comprises of, it is absolutely staggering. I mean, it must contain at least half or 2/3 of the Russian general staff. Many divisions. A division is 10,000 men apiece. If it's a cavalry division, it's 5,000. I think probably the remainder of some of the army corps from the original force that landed in Adrianople. Yeah, there's the 8th Army Corps, which is almost depopulated, plus many kind of independent brigades, mixed forces, 3rd Army Corps, a Grenadier Guards Corps perhaps, or division, I'm not too sure. So, I mean, if this force was allowed to recover and receive replacements, it would be a really colossal force. We've managed to trap it at its most vulnerable moment, its weakest moment, where it's not in a position now to receive replacements and will soon not be in a position to even be supplied. Omar Pasha is going to sit tight. We're going to sit tight in Constanta. If this comes off, there's going to be much to celebrate at Topkapi Palace, and I would not want to be the servant, the functionary to report this incident at Tsarko Selo. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.